Yep.
Okay, so we have a quorum. I'm calling the Global Warming Committee meeting in order.
Great.
To order.
Next is Pledge of Allegiance or observation of moment of silence.
Now, I'm going to say the pledge, but I'm going to mute. All right.
Okay. Next is approval of agenda order.
Can you poll the board, please?
Director Stevie?
I'm okay.
Thank you. And Director Leader?
I'm okay.
Okay. Next is public comment, and we do not have any public comment at this time.
Thank you. Next item.
Minutes. 4A, accept the minutes of the October 13th, 2020 Global Warming Committee meeting.
Director Stanley?
I approve.
Ditto. The meeting minutes are approved.
Thank you. Next item is 5A, discussion biosolids, past, present, and future.
All right. Okay,
I want to thank staff for making this presentation. This is going to be very interesting, and I'm happy that that you've put this together. So.
all right. Thank you, Director Wiener, and we'll start off. Joe's going to get going here on the first part, and then Aaron on the second part, and then of course we'll be open to questions.
Okay, thank you. So I guess Brenda will have you forward the slides as we get started.
Sure.
So we're going to start out by just giving a brief history of the Bay Area Biosolids Coalition. So this is a group of representatives from different Bay Areas that come together to decide and make decisions about how biosolids are managed. So it actually goes back, I believe, all the way to 2004 is when the group actually first was formed. And there was a strong emphasis on using biosolids to create renewable energy. And as you can see, from 2015 to 2017, that was kind of the main goal of the group was to create more renewable energy by processing biosolids. And there's actually quite a few projects that were sort of created for different agencies, and the focus was on developing those private-public partnerships for regional biosolids to energy projects. And West County Wastewater District was actually one of the agencies that was selected for a project that was going to be right on site at the plant. Some of you may remember that, some of you maybe not. This was back in 2016 when that was, I think it was February of 2016. And as you know, the district was under different leadership back then. I believe it was General Manager E.J. Shalaby who was the manager of that project, and he moved on around that time, sometime in that time frame. And so I'm not exactly sure what happened with the project. I wasn't involved with it, but obviously it never came to fruition. So maybe somebody has more information on what happened there. But the group kind of went through a little bit of a transition after that time as well. From 2018 till the present, it actually changed their name from the Bay Area Biosolids to Energy Coalition to just the Bay Area Biosolids Coalition. They dropped the to energy because the goals were kind of expanded at that time. There's some new regulatory things that were coming out that was going to impact biosolids management. Public perception of things, especially like land application, was a challenge, and communicating really the environmental benefits of land application became kind of a big focus of the group, and we'll talk a little bit about that, about why that is in the coming slides. So we can forward to the next one. So the Bay Area Biosolids Coalition goals. First of all, the mission of the group, basically kind of what are we doing, is to work collaboratively with Bay Area utilities to enhance environmental quality and support development of cost-effective and socially conscious solutions for biosolids management. And then the vision, or more of the why are we doing this, is to create a Bay Area region where all biosolids are beneficially used and recognized as an environmental asset. And so these 4 goals support that mission and the vision of the group. Number 1, to communicate the value of biosolids, to advance scientific research on safety and efficacy of biosolids. Number 3, to support and expand biosolids land application in the Bay Area. And then number 4, to support the development of diverse, cost-effective biosolids projects in the Bay Area. So we'll go into detail a little bit on all 4 of these goals and where we're at with those. You can forward to the next slide, please. So the number 1 goal here, communicating the value of biosolids. You can see there's 2 pictures on this slide. One on the bottom left is a picture of the homepage of the newly designed website for the group. It's definitely lots of more colors, lots of more pictures. You can see there's a new logo for the group there. If any of you happen to look at the current website, bayareabiosolids.com, I believe, or maybe it's .org. It's very old. I don't think it's been updated in a few years, and they have projects on there that have been scrapped. So it needed to be updated very drastically, and so that's what they've done, and we're literally within probably a week or 2 of this going live. We got actually a little tour of the new website yesterday at the meeting, so it's going to be great. And right next to that picture, you see that there's a new brochure that's about to be launched too, that talks about the safety of land applied biosolids, specifically the safety of the crops that are grown on lands that have had biosolids applied. And they focus mainly on these 4 groups of pollutants here: metals, PFAS, pharmaceuticals, pathogens. But I believe the website will go into other compounds too that people are concerned about. And again, the facts. It's going to talk more about the facts of how safe it is really to grow crops on lands that have had biosolids. There's a lot of advantages to it too. I mean, it increases crop yields. It offsets the inorganic fertilizer production and use. It increases soil content and carbon content and stability. It increases the water holding and nutrient capacity. It sequesters carbon and even can help and reclaim fire ravaged lands, or even prevent wildfire, which is kind of a newly developed benefit. But we know that's desperately needed here in California and in the Bay Area now too. So biosolids can help with all of those things. So let's go into the next slide. So the second goal here is advancing the scientific research, and you can see there's 2 studies here on this slide that the coalition has been involved with, helping to develop the scope and in a small way fund some of these parts of these studies. The benefits of land application of biosolids, again, what we've been talking about from Dr. Rebecca Riles of UC Merced. And then the new study that's actually being developed right now, and the coalition's working with Dr. Thomas Young and Dr. Gabby Black on the scope of this study about PFAS from biosolids amended soils. So that's hasn't started yet, but we're working with both of those doctors from UC Davis. developing that. So the priorities of both of these studies, as far as what the coalition's goals were, making sure that were being addressed were the benefits of biosolids used as a soil amendment, demonstrating biosolid safety, and then expanding biosolids markets. So I believe this new one in this UC Davis study is going to look at lots of different groups, not just PFAS, but it's going to look at pharmaceuticals, flame retardants, which PFAS is part of that group, but there's other compounds as well, surfactants, PCBs, dioxins. So it's going to be a very in-depth study. It's going to address a lot of pollutants of concern and make sure that biosolids are safe for growing crops on lands. So let's go to the next slide. So goal number 3, support the expansion of biosolids land application. So we talked a little bit in the initial slide about some of the regulatory challenges. The CalRecycle Senate Bill 1383 is really the big driver there. It basically deals with the organics diversion from landfills. And as you know, we send our biosolids to landfill for alternative daily cover. So that's going to limit that in the future. And they're actually expecting this to be published sometime this month in November. So there's dates that we have. I think it's compliance won't be required until 2025. So we have 5 years. And that's a major goal of the group, obviously, to make sure all of our member agencies have a plan and have a way to make sure that we're compliant by those dates. And we're in coordination with CASA, like it says there on that. And there's county ordinances, basically, in most of the surrounding Bay Area counties. Some limit biosolids application, some ban it altogether. I believe San Joaquin and Stanislaus counties have an outright ban on land application. And there's restrictions in most other counties as well. I think Sonoma, Sacramento, and Solano are the only ones that allow biosolids, unrestricted Class B biosolids. So, this Senate bill, once it gets published, that's going to drive a lot of work on these ordinances to hopefully loosen some of these restrictions so that land application can be expanded. The group is also working on coordinating with CASA and pursuing relationships with the farmers and ranchers and initiate a land application pilot in 1 new county. So that's a goal, something that's being worked on. And coordinating with SFEI on the restoration of historical marshes that may interfere with existing land application sites. So that's also being looked at. I think it was Director Stanley that brought this up in one of our meetings about the horizontal levee, that, hey, why can't we use biosolids for something like that? So that is something they're looking at as well. So we can, just another interesting thing that just came up. Most of you have probably seen it, but there's an executive order by the governor. I think it was just a few weeks ago in October, Executive Order N8220, that talked about nature-based climate management strategies. So the state agencies are now going to be, they'll have to pursue more innovative actions, basically, for land application of biosolids. That's going to be good. It's going to be good for that aspect of it, but it could also have impacts on where we discharge our wastewater to. Right now, most of our wastewater is being reused, so that's good. But we'll have to see where that goes. But it's definitely going to expand our ability to be able to land apply in the future. So goal number 4. Supporting the development of biosolids management options in the Bay Area. There's a list of potential host facilities right now with a short list of management options. They're going to look at basically 3 different management options for these host facilities for a regional facility: composting, dryer, thermal hydrolysis, which is basically creating like a liquid fertilizer from the biosolids, and then pyrolysis. These are all kind of emerging technologies that are going to be looked at. I think we lost our slideshow, but here it comes. Okay, good, thanks. So it's also going to look at the permitting process for these potential regional facilities and decide how permitting could be streamlined to make this happen, because we know we have a limited amount of time to hopefully get something up and running so that we have options. So it also has the goal here of increasing engagement with the private sector and quarterly updates on options, technology matrix, and contact information. So we've had different representatives from private agency or private companies that deal with biosolids treatment and processing technologies. So they're part of the group, and we've had presentations by them. And then we're going to start the process of looking at cost sharing contracts within the coalition as well. Excuse me, my throat's getting dry. And we're also working with CASA, continuing to work with CASA to advocate for funding. There's different funding options or possibilities in the future. The Greenhouse Gas Reduction Fund can provide projects through the Healthy Soils Initiative, Forest Carbon Plan, and the Natural and Working Lands Climate Change Implementation Plan. Apparently are all areas where funding can be drawn from, and so the group is looking into that as well. So I think that was my last slide. I don't know if we wanted to pause for questions now or just run through the whole presentation, have questions at the end.
If you'll just excuse me for 1 second, I just need to step away for about 15 seconds, but I would suggest if there's any questions we could, for Joe, we could handle those now.
Yeah.
Sure.
Harry, you're muted.
Yes, that's a status that my wife would like me to be in permanently. Do you have any questions, Director Stan?
Just a couple of comments, mostly. Joe and whoever else does presentations this morning, Brenda, can you send us the slides so that we can have them? And in 2016, yes, we were on the list, Joe, but the deal is, and it's really amazing because it seems like it was much longer than this, the technology wasn't here yet. And in just 4 years, and Aaron, you probably know more about this maybe, in 4 years, we've come a long way. So while we might have been identified as doing a project, there was no technology to do anything. So now what my question gets to is, there's been a shift in putting things on land, and this is a question I sent to Aaron. Before, not so very long ago, maybe even as little as a year ago, it was, what are we going to do with our biosolids rather than going to a landfill? Whereas now, reading the Senate bills, it looks like it says you're going to do your normal digestion, you're going to compost it, and you're going to put it out there on some land, which wasn't the mandate. There was always this big question mark back in 2016 what to do. So now we're being told, is that correct, everybody, that you're going to compost it and you're going to put it out on land? Is that what we're being told, and there's no longer any, figure it out for yourself?
So Director Stanley, if you'd like me to take the first crack at that, I don't think composting is a requirement. My understanding is that it's an option. It's a treatment option prior to land application. And our current plan, tied together with this NG project that we're working on, is to produce Class A biosolids, which you can then land apply with no further treatment. So essentially, if this project goes through and comes to fruition, we're producing Class A biosolids off the end of our process, which can be then land applied.
Okay, so I guess I'm reading this thing that came up by CASA incorrectly. So thank you for that, because I thought it was telling us we had to do certain things. So cool. All right, great.
Yeah, I believe oh, sorry. Yeah, I think it's more of the diversion away from the landfills because of the methane. I think that's what's driving it. So we're looking for options. It's just not necessarily saying that we have to land apply, but there's other possibilities as well, like storage and things like that. But land application has the most benefits. At least that's the view of the group right now. So if we can't send it to the landfills anymore, then those are the different options we're looking at. But they're not specifically telling us what we have to do with them.
Okay, so what exactly, I'm sorry, Harry, I'm not trying to be hogging up time here. What exactly is different about a Class A biosolids that makes it special?
Is that for me? I'm sorry, Director Stanley.
Perhaps you're
Yes.
the best person.
Happy to answer that one. So it's tied into three factors. Reduction of pathogens, which are obviously disease-causing organisms. Vector attraction reduction, vector being pests like flies and rodents and other undesirable things. And then the third is contaminants, and in particular heavy metals, but there are others, such that Joe mentioned, PFAS and pharmaceuticals and others. So Class B, you can hear me all right, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
So Class B is a good quality digested sludge, but the Class A, you are achieving lower levels of the contaminants I mentioned, lower levels of pathogens in the final product, excuse me, and also a lower level of vector attraction or a better vector attraction reduction, if that makes sense. So it's a better quality, and it's the highest flexibility for land application and other beneficial end uses, the Class A, that is.
Thank you, Aaron. I'm done, Harry.
Okay. What I'm noticing is, in general, there's a kind of a synthesis now of global warming solutions and solutions to the problem of waste. And that this whole discussion of soil is an example of that, where the thinking now is that soil recovery, particularly in areas that have been over-farmed and can only grow produce or grain with massive amounts of carbon from oil and fertilizer, can be recovered to be fertile again. And the fertility itself causes a drawdown of CO2 in the atmosphere. So we're standing kind of poised to be in the middle of this new synthesis, which is pretty awesome. And so I think the momentum is with us to be right there, imagine a wave, and we are poised to ride the wave, where we are in the exact right spot to get all the power of the wave and and none of the damage and none of the, none of the turbulence. We're just like at that spot, and it's pretty cool. I was thinking that we could have a local aspect of this, which would be team up with Urban Tilth and the community college and do some of the, and have them do some of that investigation you were talking about, Joe, where the science was going to determine the uptake of PFAS, et cetera. And we could, have a local aspect of it where our local, local produce suppliers, Urban Tilth in particular, they're using land that has been abandoned to grow fruit and vegetables and distribute it low-cost fruit and vegetables to Richmond. And it would be, to me, hooking up with them and kind of working through the science of this with them and the community college would be triply beneficial to our community. So just throwing that out as an idea. The other thing is that soil not only consists of fertilizer or carbon that can be utilized by plants, but it also contains flora and fauna. And it turns out that a lot of plants do not directly take their sustenance from the soil. They take it from the flora and fauna that exists, and the flora and fauna utilizes the carbon in the soil to reproduce, and then it produces byproducts that are used by plants. So I don't know who's working on it, but I know people are working on it, and I was thinking for us to keep an ear open, or the biosolids group to keep an ear open for ways to fortify our biosolids with flora and fauna, cheaply, of course, and not, not a big deal. And then the other part of adding on to this process I'd like to keep track of is CO2 production and possibly seeing if we could strengthen our processing using, say, algae, which produces as a byproduct O2 rather than CO2, for reduction of our, the incoming waste product. I don't know where that's at. I have looked on the internet, and there are companies that are, there are wastewater plants in other countries that are using algae instead of bacteria for their processes. And I'm sure that would be an expensive change. But I know right now we're taking power and using blowers to put oxygen into our tanks to fortify the activity of our bacteria to reduce the volumes. To me, it seems like if we could take the CO2 coming off of that process and bubble that into a algae-based process, then we would be not putting the CO2 into the atmosphere, but actually injecting it into the process that would help algae grow rapidly and reduce and I don't know if that's doable or how expensive that is. I just would ask that we keep our ears open to see if that becomes something that others are doing. Drying down CO2 is really the only solution that we have to global warming. Reducing to zero does not take into account all the CO2 that's been pumped into the atmosphere. So ultimately, we need to have processes that suck CO2 out of the atmosphere in greater proportion than the CO2 we pump into the atmosphere. So I think we are kind of, if every sewage treatment plant did that, that would be a huge plus for the environment. Anyway, that's what I have to say. And I'm just so pleased to hear all this information and to see that our district is, you know, putting its ear to what's going on and seeing how we fit into that whole milieu of things that people are doing around global warming and the reduction or the use of all byproducts from our processes. That's what I have to say. And now I'll put myself on mute.
Thank you, Director Weiner. So I think we're ready unless there's any more questions to jump into part two. Is that right? Andrew, anything to toss in?
No, I think you can go ahead, Aaron. I think some of the questions or comments that Director Weiner had, I think you're going to tangentially at least address in your presentation, and maybe can make an attempt to answer the algae question as well. He's squirming his face up about that, Director Weiner.
Well, what I will say is there is some component of algae in our process, in our biological process, but I am just not aware of any municipal wastewater treatment process or operation that has algae as its, you know, functional kind of core biology. So anyway, we'll go ahead and jump in. Just two things I wanted to mention before we start the slideshow part two. First, I wanted to thank Joe Nuckerbauer, because I think he's been involved in the Bay Area Biosolids committee or coalition, you know, long before I got here, and he's been doing a great job of staying involved and tracking that, where I am sometimes, because of, you know, workloads, and not to make excuses or sound like I'm making excuses, I'm not always able to tune in as closely as I'd like to what they're doing. So thank you, Joe, for staying involved. And, you know, part of that is that, you know, one of the main functions of Joe's group is to protect the treatment plant, you know, reduce pollutants that are coming to the treatment plant, which ultimately, you know, wind up to an extent in our biosolids. So there is a nexus there, which is, I think, important to recognize. And another reason why I think it's good, Joe, that you stay involved in the biosolids realm, if you will. And the only other thing I just wanted to touch on was kind of back to a previous discussion point where we talked about the West County wastewater and the siting of a regional biosolids handling or management facility, processing facility. Is, you know, I have been involved at least peripherally for about 10 years, because I was in Richmond, you know, since 2010, 2011. So I wasn't involved necessarily in the nuts and bolts of the discussions, but I was tracking it, and I think what was underestimated was the difficulty of you know, the social and the environmental justice factors of citing another large regional facility of any kind in North Richmond, and especially, you know, where we are, you know, at the treatment plant site on Garden Tract. I just think that was underestimated, and I don't think, in just my opinion, I don't think it would, knowing what I know and having been involved in certain things, I don't think it would have ever gone through the public or gotten through the public test. So anyway, I just wanted to toss that in before, and I guess let's jump in, Brenda, to the slideshow. Thank you. So please stop me at any time if there are questions. And as you can see here, I'm going to try to run through pretty quickly. I think there are 15 or 17 slides. You know, this is the general items that are going to be covered in the talk today. General facts and information about biosolids. We've covered a lot of it already. Agreements, current and future of biosolids management. And again, Joe opened up with some of that. And we also talked a little bit about the difference already between Class A and Class B. And one of the things that I think is going to become apparent is we have this really complex relationship right now between West County Wastewater, the City of Richmond, East Bay Municipal Utility District, and Republic Services, which used to be Richmond Sanitary Service, and they are now the owners of the landfill and the managers of the landfill next door. But I think as we roll through this, the complexity about the relationship and the machinations in terms of biosolids handling, leachate processing is going to really, I hope, become evident here. So let's go ahead, Brenda, to the next slide, if you will. This picture is an aerial of the treatment plant, but also the 13 active sludge lagoons, and you can see the size of the lagoons. I'm not sure exactly what the acreage, but I'm thinking it's probably 40 or 50 acres. And you can see, and I wish I had a cursor that you could follow. But in the immediate center foreground, there's actually 9 sludge lagoons. There's 3 big ones in the front. The 2 on the right are kind of blue because they have water. And then there's 6 smaller ones behind. And those are the West County lagoons. There you go. The whole 9 right there, and the ones right in the immediate foreground. To the right of that, you'll see 2 kind of white squares, and those are the 4 lagoons. There's actually 4 there that are along the parkway, and those are dedicated to use by the City of Richmond. So every day there's a 6-inch line that goes between our plant and the Richmond plant down in Point Richmond, and every day leachate goes one way for half the day in that line from the landfill. And the sludge from the City of Richmond's plant, Veolia run Richmond plant, comes back to the lagoons there. So it's a really interesting thing, at least to me. So anyway, I just wanted to show you that visual. So next slide, please, Brenda. And I think you know most of this, but anyway, sludges and biosolids are generated in the wastewater treatment processes. Sludges are continually removed to maintain an optimum solids balance in our process. So we have these huge vats of activated sludge, and continually at least 12 hours a day, we're removing sludge from the activated sludge process, thickening it, and usually sending it to the digesters. As you can see, it's typically treated in digesters, although, as you know, right now, our digesters are not in operation. So we have Synagro on site dewatering and sending directly to landfill. So essentially, there's 2 streams of solids that we take out of, or sludge that we take out of the process. One is from the biological activated sludge process, and one is from the primary clarifiers. And just so there's these 2 solids or sludge waste streams that we're removing pretty much continually. And so the material that's removed from the primary clarifiers is very nasty. It's very raw. It's a lot of organic material, food material, fecal matter, and it's just really nasty. So as I mentioned, typically that's all sent to the digesters. So those are the 2 solid streams typically referred as sludges, sent to the digester. After 15 or 20 days of digestion, you have a really well stabilized product, and that's when it really is termed biosolids. So digested sludge is typically termed biosolids. And as noted on the bottom, Class A, we've already talked about, that's the highest quality. And there's actually a product called exceptional quality, Class A, which is the highest quality, I guess. Next slide, please. So a little history. Started using the lagoons in the early 60s. Richmond began sending their sludge to the lagoons in '88. And then some volumes, about 145,000 gallons a day go to the lagoons. And as mentioned, the West County lagoons are no longer being used, so that volume of material is reduced. And as you can see, the biosolids are mostly water, very liquid, 2% to 4% solids content, so 96 to 98% water. It's very liquid, like a very thin slurry. And then the last bullet there, on average, 12 to 13 dry tons a day is produced between the two treatment plants. So roughly 60-40 or 65-35%, with the West County providing a larger component of the solids. Next slide, please. And then the next section is contracts and agreements. And as you can see, landfill leachate is treated both at the West County plant and at the City of Richmond plant in exchange for Republic Services, basically hauling and disposing of the biosolids. It's through dried sludge and grit and screenings, and they do that for both treatment plants. Leachate is the liquid that it drains from the bottom of the landfill, and there's two leachate streams. One is class 1 and one is class 2. Class 1 is from the hazardous waste section of the landfill. Class 2 is from the domestic component of the landfill. And it's noteworthy that class 1 leachate, the hazardous component, is treated. The landfill has a treatment system, so they treat the class 1 leachate, before discharge. So they remove most of the contaminants and all of the harmful contaminants that could impact the treatment plant before they discharge it. And then the last bullet there, I'm sorry, if you could go back, just the last bullet there is just on the volumes. So you can see that every day, roughly on average, 15,000 gallons of class 2 leachate goes down to the Richmond plant and is treated. And then 70,000 gallons roughly every couple months, that's probably about right, Joe, comes to the West County plant, and it's treated in batches, sent to us in batches every couple months. So much lower volume of the class 1 leachate. And then the next slide is really just a little bit more history. What we began sending effluent to East Bay Mud in '82 to irrigate the Richmond Country Club. It's noteworthy that it's probably been 20 years or so since East Bay Mud has sent any water to Richmond Country Club, and I don't know all the reasons for that. But I know part of it is because they now use all the water or most of the water to send to Chevron. So there may be some economics involved in that, but I'm not completely sure. And then as you can see, in '88, the City of Richmond, West County Wastewater and Republic Services enter into first agreement for exchange of services. And that is the solids, the biosolids, and the other solids disposal in exchange for the treatment of the leachate. And then their Republic Services began sending class 2 leachate to West County Wastewater as a result of the '88 agreement. No, I just mentioned that. So the last point there is that East Bay Mud started recycling and sending water to Chevron in 1990. And that was the original agreement for the supply of chlorinated secondary effluent between the two organizations. Any questions to this point? I can keep going through. Any questions? Director Stanley?
Director Stanley?
I was just recollection is that I think the reason why East Bay Mud doesn't send water to the country club anymore is because there's a pipe that needs to be replaced, and the country club didn't want to do it, so they don't get the water, I believe, is the story I was told. That's all.
And that is consistent with my, some things that I've heard, but again, everything that I've heard is third, kind of third person. But the other piece is that there is a pump station that we've managed which actually pumps the water to the country club. And that pump station was found recently. I don't know when the last time it was looked at, but it was found recently to have 4 feet of water in it, with the electrical and the other equipment. So we've basically remedied that situation. So that's another piece of it. I'm sorry, Director Weiner, a question?
Yeah, I wanted to, I kind of glazed over when you were talking about the leachates, but I'm very curious about them. We have two types of leachate. One is more caustic than the other, or has more.
It comes out of the landfill that way because it comes from a section of the landfill that once held or took hazardous materials, but it's treated. The landfill has a big treatment system, which Joe goes and inspects every year and permits. So it's treated before they send the treated leachate to us, to the West County plant. And as I noted, it's a much smaller volume than the class 2.
And the leachate from that, the more dangerous, what exactly do they do to treat it? Do they remove things from it?
Yes, and Joe, I don't know. I've walked through the facility. I'm not too sure of the treatment processes. If there's anything you can add?
Yeah, they have a pretty advanced treatment system there. They do oil separation. They remove metals. They have an air stripper that knocks out volatile organics. So by the time it's done, even with all of those advanced treatment, because that class 1 leachate's pretty nasty stuff. So it's about the same strength as the untreated class 2 when they're done cleaning it up for us. So there's still quite a bit of ammonia in there, but it's a small, like Aaron said, it's a small volume. But yeah, the treatment system they have there is fairly new. I think it was built maybe 5 or 6 years ago, but it's pretty impressive. It's actually interesting to walk through there, but they do several different processes on that leachate.
So now that we have the class 1 and class 2 and treated class 1 and untreated class 2, do we do further treatments? Does Richmond do further treatments on that?
It is actually sent to the influent of both plants. So it comes in with the rest of the sewage incoming from the service area. It's basically, and then it's run through the plant and treated through the regular processes along with the rest of the sewage.
And so whatever the chemical output of that, some of it goes to Chevron, most of it goes to Chevron, and some of it goes to back to Richmond, and then Richmond puts it in the outfall, or how does that?
So it basically it just becomes part of the the sewage or the waste stream that's going through each of the treatment plants. And as you'll see in the upcoming slides, it's noted in the upcoming slides, we've been taking class 1 leachate since 2003, and Richmond has been taking class 2 leachate since about 2000, and there have been no ill effects on our effluent or treatment processes, mainly because of the regulatory framework and how closely we're looking and the permitting and the monitoring that's required as part of the process.
I have 2 short questions, please, Aaron.
Yes.
Is the mostly liquid in our drying beds, is it safe for wildlife? Because I know all the ducks and things float around in there and they're drinking the water. Is it okay for them?
Yeah. I mean, I'm certainly not a wildlife biologist, but what I can say is that for 25 years, my 25 years in the field, I mean, you're always seeing, I guess it's kind of anecdotal. You're always seeing ducks and geese and other birds. And very rarely, if ever, have I seen any that were impacted, either, looked ill or dead. So again, it's anecdotal. And I think if there were issues, I can only, expect that it would have been looked at a long time ago.
Okay. And so so we're having to decide what we're going to do with our biosolids, but and I know the landfills have their own stuff, and we're all on this 2025 date, I think. What is the landfill's plan for their leachate once? Are they going to keep sending it to us, or what's the deal?
Well, what again, this is mentioned in the upcoming slides in the presentation. The landfill actually closed in 2003, and part of their closure plans, they had to submit to the state closure and post-closure plans, which included how they were going to handle the leachate. And so there are agreements in place, and the agreement that handles or that addresses the leachate runs through about 2030. And again,
Okay.
that was part of what they had, what had to be agreed on, and what they had to come up with for the state to agree to their plans and approve their plans.
And Director Stanley, I think that Aaron alluded to that near the beginning of his presentation. It is a series of agreements between multiple parties, and it satisfies, DTSC, that's Department of Toxic Substances Control. They monitor the landfills, requirements for the landfill, as well as, what Richmond can do with its its sludge, et cetera. All of these agreements are going to have to be revisited. We've had preliminary conversations with Republic about that. Richmond is aware of the changes that we're going to be making, but we don't know exactly where all of that will go yet. The leachate that comes, it is not by necessarily something that we can't continue to take. It's just like what Joe monitors on all of our industrial dischargers, and some of them have to do pre-treatment and get it to a standard that's acceptable to come to the plant, that then we can treat it and remove additionally whatever has to be removed to make it safe. So all of those are going to have to be looked at, and it's going to be a big undertaking to get all those agreements in place with all the different parties, but that's part of the process.
That's basically what I wanted to know, is if people were talking to each other. I obviously am aware, and I heard what Aaron said about all these different agreements. I just wanted to know if it was in process now. So thank you for that.
Well,
I'm done.
In process is that people are aware. We have talked more with Republic, and Richmond is aware of what's coming, but Richmond also possibly believes they're going to be treating the sludge on their own site and not be sending it to us for treatment, because it is in their capital plan to do so. But we're not so sure that's actually going to happen in any quick time frame. So we're going to have to be discussing with Richmond what happens with their sludge.
Okay, let's jump back in if there's nothing further at this point, please. So I think we pretty much covered all of this. Just the last point there. Part of the reason for the agreements, and I think it's on the next slide. You can see in the last bullet there that about 2000. The leachate, the West County Wastewater District was treating the Class 2 leachate, which is the high volume leachate, which is high in ammonia, and it started to impact the effluent quality and what was sent to East Bay Mud for Chevron. Next slide, please. And these are just the agreements. The various agreements, and as you can see, in 2001, 3 separate agreements were struck, which allowed for I believe East Bay Mud paid for the construction and operation of the leachate bypass pipeline. So prior to that, the leachate was coming to our plant on Garden Track. East Bay Mud paid for the upgrades to that. It's basically a valve cluster that allows leachate to be sent into the line down to Richmond. So those 3 agreements were struck in 2001, which is critical. And then 2010 agreement is the first year that that we entered into a ground lease with the city of Richmond, and they pay a lease fee for the sludge lagoons on the parkway, and they have since that time. Next slide, please. A little bit more, and you all know the history. Our digesters were shut down in 2020. New digester system planned as part of the NG project. Currently have contract with Synagro, and there's an RFP out, and we expect, I think it is another week that we expect to have responses to the current RFP for continuing dewatering. And also, you know, the third bullet there, Republic Services, as mentioned elsewhere earlier, they typically dewater and clean three of the sludge lagoons every year, 3 or 4, and it's typically 2 or 3 of the West County lagoons and 1 of the Richmond lagoons. And that typically results in about 600 or 700 trailer trips to the landfill, which is a lot. And one of the things that we expect with the Class A is obviously not going to landfill, but also a reduction in the number of trips per day. And then the last bullet there, the project from NG includes new digesters, centrifuge dewatering, sludge drying system, and an engine system using digester gas for electrical production. And you'll see some of the pictures here coming up in the next slides of what that's going to look like. Next slide, please. More history. The NG project we expect to no longer use the lagoons, and if you know, this ties back to a question that was asked just a few minutes ago. So when we shut down the use of the sludge lagoons for West County, they're actually already shut down. And the NG project is put together. You know, our intention, I think, is to have negotiated with Richmond by that time, you know, and basically letting them know that we will no longer be using any of our lagoons, which is kind of, I expect to be a lever to further encourage them to get, you know, to agree to sludge processing with us. And again, this is just high level preliminary thinking, but it's where I think would be the best option. Having worked for the city of Richmond and Veolia for 8 years, I know that sludge dewatering is on their capital plan for 2024, 2025, but I think that's very overly optimistic. So anyway, more to follow and more discussions to come on that. And as Andrew mentioned before on that third bullet, we'll need to review and really you know, restructure all of these agreements, and it's going to be quite an effort. Next slide, please. And the next couple of slides, as I mentioned, are going to be some equipment slides, and this is what a centrifuge looks like. And this is actually the same Alfa Laval centrifuge that NG is proposing in their project. And the bottom picture is actually what the centrifuge looks like. In the top is a schematic of how the thing works. And it's like a sideways bottle that spins, and you've got these vanes on the drive shaft and the sludge feed coming in from the right. And again, it's an oversimplification, but you got the solids that drop out of one side of the bottom, and then the liquid that drops out of the other side. And again, that's roughly how it works. You can see the bottom picture. You have the motor that spins the centrifuge on the bottom right there. And what this equipment does is, I mentioned that digested sludge comes out of the digesters at roughly 2 to 3% solids. This equipment will thicken that material up to about roughly 22 to 25% solids. And what we'll see in one of the next pictures is what the dryer looks like, which is the step that'll produce the Class A biosolids. And it also will get the solids to about 80% dry. Next slide, please. So this is just kind of a representative of what the process looks like on the left. And these are bags of the finished product that we could theoretically commoditize, and how we might distribute this for, for local land application or gardening or whatever, for example. But if the reality is that we're going to be producing, 10 to 13 tons per day, that's agricultural scale biosolids or fertilizer that would, probably need to be sent to the Central Valley or Solano County, somewhere where, where you have that scale of agriculture as opposed to local. So anyway, just again, thinking a little bit more, thinking out loud. Next slide, please. And these are representatives. I couldn't find the exact Griffin dryer that Engie has spec'd out, but these are a couple of examples of what the technology looks like. And these things are probably 30 or 40 feet long, and they blow heat into the top, and they have a belt that carries the sludge that comes from the centrifuge along for probably a few minutes along the belt. And you've got heat that'll be captured from our cogen engines. And then that heat is blown in, and it dries the sludge further to that 80% that I mentioned before, and actually creates the Class A biosolids. Next slide, please. And these are just a couple examples of what the cogen engine will look like. The one on the bottom is the engine itself. And again, these are not representative of what we will have constructed or plan to have constructed. The one on the bottom, the one on the top is the enclosure, which would have the engine inside of it. So again, as I mentioned, this engine would use methane from our digesters. The methane is used in basically the engines burn that. The engines co-produce electricity, which either is fed back into the grid or we would use at the plant. Not sure how that would work yet. Probably could be a hybrid. And as I mentioned, the heat that comes off the engine is recovered and will be used, I believe, to both heat the digesters and to dry the sludge on the process that you saw on the previous page. Next slide, please. And we really talked about this already, but it's just a little bit more detail. It talks about the criteria that Class B versus Class A needs to meet per the Environmental Protection Agency. And it talks about temperature, time and temperature, and that type of thing. Reductions in the pathogens, contaminants, and vector attraction. We already talked about that. Class B, you need 15 days in the digester at 98 degrees. And to the next step on top of the Class B, running it through a dryer for that 122 degrees for a minimum of 15 seconds. That's what gets you your Class A. And as mentioned, more flexibility with the Class A, land application, beneficial reuse. And I already talked about the last bullet. Next slide, please. It might be the last one. That is the last slide. Lots of information.
Any questions, Director Stanley?
Aaron, thank you so much for that. Who knew that poop would be so interesting? But I find it very interesting. What are we going to be doing with the drying beds? What is the plan for that when we cease using them? Is that strictly for overflow?
Actually, only a percentage, and I think the Engie plan calls for using about 3 of the lagoons, and I'm not sure how much it is for acreage, but I think it's about 10 million gallons that would be used for additional equalization to satisfy our NPDS permit requirements.
So,
And
so
then-
directors,
Go ahead, Andrew.
so Director Stanley, at this point, other than that percentage usage, there are no definitive plans for what we'll use them for. There's going to be property that's potentially available for some other uses, and we'd have to find something compatible. Are we composting the regional facility that had been talked about, but there's other reasons why that might not work in this area? It could be that it becomes part of a wetland habitat restoration or part of using that land in some ways, but that's not determined yet. The first thing is to get everything else together and then recognize that we will also free up potentially some land for some other uses.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Aaron, Joe, and Andrew. Great. And this would be very interesting for the board in general. I don't know when or how that would come about, but I think it would be informative and lend some strength to our direction if the rest of the board was brought into this, or at least had a presentation regarding the future of the plant and all of the facts regarding our agreements, etc. So I leave that up to you to figure out what that would look like and when you could get that together. But I suggest that that would be something important to do. I took a tour of the plant not too long ago, and there was a bed that had been abandoned, and it had a reed. It had all these reeds, classic reeds, and I've never seen an environment like that anywhere else in the bay. And there were all these blackbirds that were nesting in there, and it was quite the thing. And it was, all the poop that had rested in there for, 20, 30 years was creating this just incredible reed bed.
So,
Do you know if that exists elsewhere?
so if I can just explain, and don't take this the wrong way, but I will just say that by the time anything gets into our sludge lagoons, it is no longer any relative of poop. Just wanted to toss that out there. It's turned into an absolute biological soup, which has no poop or fecal component. I have to make that clear.
I didn't mean that. I didn't mean it. I didn't mean it. Honestly.
I said it. I'm sorry. My bad.
That's okay. That's okay. I know I'm skating on thin ice here, but I wanted to toss that out there. But in seriousness, Director Weiner, so the lagoon that you're talking about is all the way at the back of the plant, right? And it has the solar arrays in it, right? So that is actually Lagoon 14, and it has not in some decades, and Joe probably knows the timing better than I do. It has not been used for storage of biosolids. It is a stormwater only lagoon, so that when we have heavy rains, the runoff from the treatment plant is actually diverted back to that lagoon. And so it has not taken biosolids for a long time, but it has also not been cleaned because it is just used for stormwater. Is that right, Joe?
Yep. So it's kind of a freshwater marsh.
It is. Yep.
And so is there anywhere else in the bay that looks like that you know of? I mean, it was pretty impressive.
Not that I'm aware, but it is pretty amazing when you walk back back out there and you see all the birds and who knows what all other wildlife is back there. It's pretty amazing.
Yeah, I mean the reeds themselves are really impressive. Almost biblical. Moses, you could see Moses floating in there on his reed bed or whatever they made. Yeah, I'm just curious if that habitat was formerly common and that spot's the only place where the conditions exist for it to come back. It's pretty interesting. Anyway, thank you.
Is that question, Aaron, follow up on what Harry just was talking about? Is that when we've been told we had so many millions gallons worth of storage? Is that the place, or was it somewhere else? For wet weather.
Are you talking about the specific lagoon that Director Weiner was referencing?
Yeah, is that where it went, or was it somewhere else? Something about 65 million gallons of wet water capacity is.
Okay. Brenda, could you pull up the first page of the slideshow? Again, I just want to check something, and this will help, I think. If I understand the question, you're asking about we have roughly 50 or 53 million gallons of EQ, right?
That's what I was asking about. Yeah,
Yeah.
53
Yeah.
gallons.
So
Is that the same place where Harry's talking about?
it is not. It is not. And if we can get back to the first page of this, this I can show you if it's not. So yeah, that's perfect. The one with the picture of the sludge lagoons that you were just looking at there. If you notice there in the absolute bottom right of the picture,
Yeah.
you can see concrete, and that is actually where our stormwater EQ basin is. It extends considerably back towards us, kind of conceptually. Yeah, that area right there. That is where our 53 million. We have 3 stormwater EQ basins which are tied together right in that spot, coming back towards us.
Okay. All right. So where Harry's talking about is back in the back.
It's in the back left, the back left lagoon with the solar arrays in it. If you can see.
All right. Well, that's
Yep.
very interesting. Cool. Thank you. I'm done. Sorry.
All right, so do we have any further items on our agenda?
I thought we had a part 3, past, present, and future.
Oh, no, that was all part of Aaron's there. He was giving you the past, the present, and the future with
The title was a misnomer.
with a preamble from Joe on everything that Biosolids Group has been working on. It was a generic title that I put in there at the time to make sure that we could talk about whatever we wanted to talk about on biosolids, and we were properly agendized.
Gotcha. Well, good thinking on you, dude.
Good job. Good job. Yeah, so next item?
Next item is 5B, discussion of North Richmond Shoreline Levee Project, community outreach.
And Director Stanley, we have this on here. There's no report. Both you and Director Weiner were at the stakeholder meeting, the last one, and you had some things you wanted to talk about. So we put this on here as an agenda item.
Thank you for that. I was, it occurred to me listening to our last levy meeting, and especially the lady who just got back from leave, and I didn't get her name, but there was a whole lot of talk about getting the community involved in decision making, and I started reeling back and going, wait a minute here. I at the North of Richmond MAC meeting recently, Urban Tilt gave a presentation, and they're doing something pretty spectacular all on their own, and they're turning their garden into part of a history thing for the local community and a community garden and science. It's pretty impressive what they're trying to do. But, and I'm mentioning that because I personally, this is my personal opinion, I don't want community to think that this is a tell us everything you want, we'll provide it. You know, we're primarily a sewer company, and if we can, with partnership with the landfill and Chevron and other landowners and possible free money or low cost money or whatever, if we can make it work financially for everybody involved to create a large levee that protects the neighborhood and provides a really cool wildlife thing and whatever else we can do. You know, if it's up to me, we'd build a 2-story science building, but that's besides this, that's beyond this discussion. What I was starting to get concerned about and listening to people talking at the levee meeting was, well, I think, you know, we should all get a vote. Well, you know what? In my opinion, not everybody gets a vote. It's the people who's paying for this who gets the vote. And perhaps now might be a good time for the landfill, the wastewater district, Chevron, and the landowners who have no idea that this is even being talked about to be meeting up on their own and say, this is what we can do, this is what we're willing to do, and divide a little bit, because yes, of course we want community input. Of course we want to provide as much as we can to the community. But by our very nature of being a special district, we cannot just give away our money. We cannot do certain things, and that's something that perhaps people weren't understanding, and it was sort of alarming me that it was like a train starting to get off its tracks a little bit. I personally would like to do everything environmentally that we can to benefit our community, to protect our community, et cetera, et cetera. But I also I personally want to make sure that we're clear when we're asking the community to be involved, who's paying for this. It isn't some undefined taxpayers' money. We're asking there are 2 partners, we're confined, and then we got a bunch of small landowners who might not want to spend any money whatsoever. So I think that it's important to have this discussion with the people who own the land, who's going to be directly impacted, to kind of huddle up and see where everyone's standing at this point before we start getting a whole bunch of, well, you know, if it's Santa Claus, let me give you my list, because we can't necessarily play Santa. Am I being clear of what I'm saying?
Yes, Director Stanley, you are, and it's actually even more complicated, I think, than what you're putting out there right now, in that we have this regional body that was formed to support the Resilient by Design, and then has continued for other purposes, and is really looking at this as a regional project, and we are a member and a participant in that. And then separately, we have a grant from the San Francisco Bay Restoration Authority specifically to do some preliminary design, preliminary planning and some design on one of the alternatives that is identified through that process, and that includes a community outreach component. That is a grant directly to the wastewater district, and we have certain fiduciary responsibilities there and certain things that we can and can't do with those funds. And so there's 2 parts. There's this big regional program, and then there's how much can be done with this particular grant, and if it ends up focusing down in on a levee in front of the treatment plant that doesn't involve many of the other landowners in that initial phase, that's a different set of community involvement and what kind of input that we would be getting on that. We definitely want to work on the trails and education center and a variety of things, but where is that funding coming from? That remains to be seen. And so there's a desire for us to continue to participate in a regional, broader regional approach, as well as we need to perform on this initial phase that we have. And the two are getting conflated together, and it's been difficult to figure out how we put the RFP together too with our master consultant and what this community outreach component actually looks like, because there's also a desire on the part of the local community to be the people that are actually performing that community outreach as part of this this grant application. And some thoughts of we would separately contract for that. We would contract the community outreach, and then we would contract out all the other design work with the master consultant. That becomes highly problematic from an administrative and a project management standpoint. So I think that what you're saying, I agree with. We want all the ideas and we want the input, and we certainly want the input on the design that we're going to put out in front of the treatment plant if that's what we do. We want to continue to work as a larger group. All the property owners are by no means the same. Chevron and Republic are two large property owners with waterfront property and money. Then we have public property owners in their Contra Costa County and the Parks District. And then we have a lot of these small property owners. And even if you just lump them into those three categories, there's significantly different perspectives on what they can do, what they should do, and what they're willing to do. And so trying to bring them all together is not even close to being, an organized, cohesive group. So yes, I share your concerns. We want to do this. We want to be as transparent as possible. We want to work with the community. We also need to temper expectations of what can happen at particular phases. We don't want to preclude things. But once we get it narrowed down on this first grant that we'll be working through, it probably ultimately will have to start to focus down more on what's happening on a shorter segment, perhaps that half mile. But the preliminary planning part is going to look at the whole package. And so what I'm seeing is that the MOU, or the stakeholder group that we're trying to put together some form of an MOU on, is a already formed group that has history and represents a lot of people. That can be a component of our community outreach for the initial phase here that we're working through with the grant. But it is not the community outreach group that gets to vote and decide basically, what project we end up with. That really, if we're building a project and it's in front of the treatment plant, there's input from the group, but it's not, as you put, they're not the ones. Our board is the one who will vote on, what we ultimately decide to do and how we pay for it. But we want input. We want a lot of input, and we want to make sure that we're thinking about it regionally, and whatever we do, even on that smaller portion, then could be consistent and built upon and used sort of as an example of how we can expand. So I don't have a really good answer for you on exactly how we do that, but I do share your concerns because we want the outreach, we want the community input, but we also have to temper some expectations of what we, as the wastewater district, can do. Right now, we essentially are in the lead position because we're up first with this and we're willing to try to do something in front of it. But are we really the lead agency for doing a 5-mile levee across the North Richmond shoreline? Probably not. But we can be a very important component of that and be the first ones to move out the gate with a section that we see as viable. And I think that's the primary thing I'm focused on, is how do we do a project in front of our facility that contributes to the whole, but it's not the whole picture. It's part of it, and that we continue to be part of that larger group. So it'll be a challenge, throughout. But the good thing is we have community engagement, we have involvement, and we want that. But we can't be building everything to protect, miles inland, et cetera. There's limited things that we can do with our funds and in our property. So
Yeah, I wasn't looking for an answer really, Andrew. I just wanted to make sure that we're keeping our feet in reality. If it was up to me, we would build everything, castles in the sky. But and I also want to throw out there for the information, since we're talking about the levee right now, there is a wood recycler somewhere near us that if we ever decided we needed wood products to add to our digesting. And there is a business off of Giant Highway. If you were coming from the treatment plant and you took a left on Giant Highway, on the right there's a business that adds stuff to soil to make it better. They analyze farmers' soil and then tell the farmers what they need to add. And I'm just throwing that out there that they might be somebody that let Josh know about, that maybe he wants to bring in those groups in case those two companies, in case they have something that they think they could add to this process. But primarily, I just didn't want, I wanted somebody to tap the brakes just a little bit and make sure that the community that's giving us their input, love them, want them, and all that stuff, but there are limitations.
yes, and we have tapped the brakes a little bit in that I haven't issued that RFP yet. I haven't put that together because this is part I'm struggling with, and I've had conversations with Josh, and we've had conversations with a few other members of the committee. But we need to move, and we need to put it out there, and I'm inclined to keep it as one master consultant, and they put in the community outreach component, and then we figure out how to work with that group and work on that scope. Part of that work plan will get put together after we have them on board. Because I think I can't continue to overthink it here. We've got it. We just got to start moving forward on it and react and hopefully respond. I hate to react. I like to respond, meaning we've thought through a bunch of the contingencies and have some ability to respond and not just react and be surprised by things. So I'm not sure I'll be surprised by any reaction we get here. There's a lot of people that really want to help, and we want that input. We just figure out.
Well, I like what the group's doing, and yes, let's make a step forward and changing it from an MOU to a whatever it was, that word they were using, a charter.
Yeah.
Seems a lot more sense.
Yeah, it's essentially the same thing, but the legal connotations. I think that Paul from Contra Costa County brought it, is that it was the kind of thing that made his attorneys nervous. It might take us a long time to get people to sign it, even though it was what we were calling a non-binding. But by having a charter, it's sort of a different term and doesn't have the same kind of legal connotations that some of the public agencies would be afraid of. Not afraid of, but just would have to be more careful with. So yeah, I think we probably will change the title of it.
Okay, that was my comments. Thank you so much for that.
Well, no, I appreciate your comment on that and sort of the awareness of the same things that we're seeing, and we absolutely. I want to make it very clear that we absolutely want the community input, and we'll continue to solicit that and incorporate that and not just ask for it and ignore it. That's certainly not our intent, but there is a little bit of narrowing of the focus that's going to have to happen as this starts to come down to what's in front of the plant and what we can actually do in this phase of the design.
I would like to reframe kind of a little bit on what Sherry was talking about. And that is my experience in a very contentious city called Berkeley has been that the process is meant to be transparent and public, and everyone's invited, and everyone comments, and all the comments are taken to heart, and a project develops based on all the comments and input. And then the city council would approve what the commissioners and the committees have worked for, year and a half on, thinking that they had everybody who was concerned come to the meetings and add input. And the minute they pass a solution that they've been seeking, all of a sudden there's resistance to whatever it is, and it's massive. And so I think that this process needs to try to, and I don't know if it's possible, but try to be sure that we have enough of those who will take an interest to the final whatever our plan is, the final plan, are included up front so that they can defend the plan rather than attack it. Because if we don't have the right people in there, then as Andrew was talking about earlier, then you have all this resistance that you can't put in a regional plant to take biosolids and convert them to a soil product. Was that Andrew or Aaron? It was Aaron who mentioned that. So I just wanted to reframe the issue in that we want to end up with our great plan not being thought, second guessed in the end, is basically what we're trying to do.
Thank you, Director Weiner, and I also agree with that, in that there are the two parts. We want all of that input, and I think that where my concern lies is that there are sort of two parts to this. Is what we have funding for right now in that preliminary planning phase is looking at the entire reach. But when we get to the 30% design phase, even if there's even enough funding to do that, then that's most likely going to be focused on a smaller reach that's in front of our plant. And if that's the case, then the design elements and the input and what we're looking at would have to be a reasonable and a feasible thing that could happen on that portion of it, recognizing that it's part of this larger potential regional thing, and that the stakeholder group would continue on as a community group providing input on this regional approach, while this first phase of a project would be constructed, and the amount of change that could happen on that sort of limited portion of it, that we can't shove everything that we want from the entire regional approach into half a mile of levee. That's what my concern is that we've got to be realistic, and that we absolutely would continue to be a regional partner, but perhaps not the leader of the entire regional approach. Right now, we are in sort of the leadership role because we're the ones with the money and the grant, and the focus is on us to try to design this, and yet it's the first phase of that is really a regional, and then we're trying to figure out where we fit into that part of it. So I'm challenged on how to try to explain that and make sure that I think many of the community members recognize that, many of the participants, and there's some that are coming in that say, hey, wait a second, how come you didn't think about this part perhaps over here? And we're like, well, we did in the preliminary planning, and it hasn't been jettisoned or forgotten about, but it's not part of maybe this first construction phase. And that's the trick that we're going to have to get to.
Yeah, it's better to be influential than to be the leader.
Yeah. Well, hopefully right now we're both, but we'll see what happens.
Sorry. All right, next item, please.
Next item is 6A, reports on issues or matters pertaining to the work of the committee.
We have nothing else right now, Director Weiner.
All right, next item, please.
Next item is 7A, reports on issues or matters pertaining to the work of the committee.
Director Stanley?
I guess this is where I complained to Andrew. It's not a big deal, it happens every time new people start doing something. When I went to the web page to check out the agenda, I never seem to, my eyes never wander over to the right-hand side of the web page. And I'm always because I'm always going to the calendar, and then I click on the calendar, and then the calendar takes me to, for example, today it takes me to a page that says Global Warming Committee meeting, and then usually right below that is a link for the agenda. And that's what has been the way it's been done for the last 4 years, except just recently things have been changing because people are coming and going this year. And so I just want to say, can we make it so that when we click on the calendar and it takes us to a page that there's a link so that we can do it, get the agenda, versus assuming that we're all looking on news and announcements? Because for me, news and announcements, why it might make sense to put things there. I'm not interested in news and announcements. I'm looking for an agenda. So can we go back to including a link at that way? Do you understand me?
Yes, I think I understand. I don't know, Brenda, if you want to respond to that at all, but before she does, there will be major changes coming to the website as a whole, within the next couple of months or so. And then so it'll look different all over again. But
okay. Well, I know this isn't Brenda's bailiwick. I'm just letting you know.
no, I just
that's
meant this very specific one, if there was anything that she could add about how to find it a little bit more easily.
I spoke with Director Stanley about it earlier, and I will do some research to make sure that we do get the link back on there.
All right, thank you.
You're
I
welcome.
think that's about the best we can do right now, Director Stanley. But we hear you.
Yeah,
We
thank you.
want to make the whole website a little bit more friendly, and we're working on that.
Mm-hmm. All right, thank you.
I have no issues. Next item.
Well, are we going to
Next
talk
item.
about any future?
Next item is the future agenda.
Oh,
Yes.
Director Stanley, do you have any future agenda items?
well, I thought we had kind of a list going. Do we, Andrew?
We've used up a lot of the list. I was just trying to think that I could go back and look at my notes of what we had outstanding. Wanted to talk about the biosolids. We gave an update on the NG. I'm not
Okay,
sure.
well,
Joe, I don't know if it's time for maybe you want to come back and give an update on some of the things that we've been doing with the inspection program in the time of COVID and things like that. I don't know if that will be something interesting and useful to the directors to see how we're managing that.
Yeah, definitely. There's going to be an update on that pretty soon. We're working on, like Andrew said, some kind of innovative things with some of our inspection programs. Obviously, it's been a challenge with COVID. We're almost done with a special program for our fog inspection, and I'll just tease you with that. But we have something in the works with that we can present.
Yeah, and
Okay.
I guess we'll have to take a look and make sure that it fits under the mandate of the Global Warming Committee. I think there's probably a link there, but we'll make sure.
Yeah, well, okay, then one of the things that I've asked about at a board meeting before is the possibility of us having, I'm going to use Tesla battery walls because I don't know any other way to explain what it is that I'm looking for. I'm concerned that there's going to be another emergency. Who the hell knows what it's going to be? It might be the Hayward fault. But I'm concerned that we won't have the ability to obtain and fill up our gas or diesel power generators, and that we won't have power for, let's say, a week. And I want to know, how can we make sure that we have enough energy stored to last 2 or 3 or 4 days? And how can we make sure that we're producing enough to keep the plant going if we're in such a disastrous thing that occurs that we can operate the plant, but we just don't have the power to do so? I would like to know, is it possible today, with today's technology, to create backup power to do that and to produce enough power on our own to additionally add to that backup power to take care of our plant? Or is the technology not here yet? Or is the technology so expensive that it's prohibited? Can
Okay.
that be worked
Yeah,
somewhere from somebody?
We can take a look at that and maybe combine that with some of the work that we're looking at doing. If we get a grant from OES on the continuity plan, it'll take a look at some of that kind of power at lift stations, et cetera. But no, we're not going to try to answer any of the questions here right now. But in the future agenda item, I think there's something in there that we can think about and put together. That's going to take a little more time. It's not that there wasn't time and effort that had to go into what Joe and Aaron did today, but this was areas where we have a lot more information and familiarity with off the bat, and it's putting it together in a way that we can present it. So yes, we can think about that one. I understand what you're looking for.
Thank you.
I'm not sure that's not an issue. I mean, that's part of a much larger issue for the district, which is risk management and disaster planning. And I know that we have plans in place, but that we're reviewing them. And I know that earthquake was recently a subject that was brought forth from the regional government to be discussed and considered. I forget their public relations push. It was called Shake, and they were bringing up that we need to have these plans in place for that kind of disaster. I think Director Stanley is touching upon that. So I'm not sure that the Global Warming Committee is the place to bring that forward. I think it's more, an item for the General Board or possibly the Planning Committee to update and, solidify our risk management and disaster plans.
Yes, I agree with that, Director Wiener, but there might be a piece in there regarding the battery storage and the backup and what kind of energy sources we use that could be a specific slice. It would still be worth something we could talk about here and maybe answer some of those questions. But the overall disaster preparedness, et cetera, is outside the overall purview of the Global Warming Committee.
Yeah, no, I'm very interested in those things, but I was just.
No, I appreciate that.
Okay. Anything else, Director Stanley?
Nope, I'm good. Thank you.
All right. Next item, please.
Next item
Before we,
Director Stanley,
before we-
let's back up a page.
sorry.
I'm too excited about that item, so please, go ahead.
I was just going to say, before we adjourned, I wanted to say thank you to everybody who gave presentations today and participated today. I very much appreciate your time and effort.
Thank you.
Ditto. Next item, please.
Next item is 8, adjournment.
So done. We are adjourned. Thank you all for your
All right.
participation. Appreciate
Thank
it.
you.
Thank
Thank
you.
you.